Six Nations and the Rugby Championship, the two premier competitions in rugby union outside of the Rugby World Cup, obviously. The one with the six Northern Hemisphere teams, and the Rugby Championship is the one with the four Southern Hemisphere teams. The competitions often get compared a little bit and contrasted. I'm not sure what the stereotypes about the Rugby Championship are up north. Down here in New Zealand, obviously the Six Nations tends to get stereotyped as like, oh, it's a bit boring, it's always raining, and they just kick penalties, there's no tries. But why don't we have a look? I've had a look at the stats for each competition for 2021. That's kind of how the logs finished, just in terms of wins and losses. New Zealand won the Rugby Championship 5-1. Wales' record in the Six Nations was pretty similar, 4-1. So no teams went undefeated. You both had teams who failed to pick up wins in the Pumas and in Italy. But let's go through the combined stats of the competition and see, are there any kind of massively clear differences between the teams? I do think there's at least a couple of stats that look good, particularly for the Rugby Championship games, but then there's also a couple of numbers that I really like for the Six Nations. So yeah, as always, you guys can let me know your thoughts. Both competitions were a little bit impacted by COVID. Obviously, the Scotland and France match had to be rearranged in the Six Nations, and the games for the latter period of the competition had to take place all in Australia for the Rugby Championship. So kind of not a normal year by any means. But anyway, we'll go through things. Let's start with some of the standard stuff, man. Tries. There are a ton more tries scored in the Rugby Championship compared to the Six Nations. No, it's actually slightly edged for the Six Nations if you're looking at the average tries per game, but it's bugger all in it. 2.8 for the Six Nations, 2.6 for the Rugby Championship. So very little in it. But if you're drilling down by teams, the All Blacks score 4.7 tries a game, so they are kind of pumping those numbers up for the Rugby Championship teams, whereas Argentina were really struggling, not even a try a game. And for the Six Nations, Scotland and France, 3.6 tries a game. A lot of teams scored a lot of tries versus Italy, to be fair, so their numbers kind of get bumped up a wee bit, whereas the All Blacks had a try-scoring bonanza against Australia, more so than against the bottom-place team. They did it against the second-place team, so there you go. There's not a lot in it with tries. Run meters, again, there's not a heck of a lot in it. The average is 380 run meters per team per game in the Six Nations. It's 408 for the Rugby Championship, so it's slightly higher, but it's not drastically different, I would say. Again, it's the All Blacks pumping up the numbers with 575. The Argentinians struggle with 281. It's France, who will seem to be similar to New Zealand in several aspects of the stats, to be fair. They're the front runner for the Six Nations with 440. But Wales are the team least likely to run the ball as far per game with 309. I should have said this at the start. I didn't get these stats from the Six Nations website because they use AWS as their stats provider. I've gotten them all from the Opta site via ESPN. So they do both competitions the same standard. Like the way AWS does the scoring for the run meters and stuff is way different from the way Opta does it. They've just got a different system. Their numbers come out very contrastingly. AWS's numbers are massive compared to Opta's ones. They give a lot more credit for run meters and stuff like that. So I've at least used the same source, so the stats are comparable. But yeah, interestingly though, that for the Rugby Championship, it's the team that ran the ball the most that won, and for the Six Nations, it's the team that ran the ball the least that won. Just one of those kind of quirky little things. Defenders beaten, 20 a game per team for Six Nations, 18 for the Rugby Championship, so not much in it. The Six Nations kind of edges it. Again, it's New Zealand number one for the Rugby Championship. It's South Africa who's last, 23 and 12 respectively for the Six Nations. Wales are the least, and Scotland are actually the most. So Scotland with 29 would better any team when you look at all the stats combined. Clean breaks, again, there's not much in it, man. 7.5 a game per team in the Six Nations, 6 for the Rugby Championship, but the Rugby Championship was a bit of a contrast in that the All Blacks and Wallabies got a lot, and the Pumas and Boks got bugger all. So it's kind of a distinct split in the way the the competition was going in terms of being able to generate clean breaks. Like New Zealand 10 a game, whereas like the Box 1.7, the Pumas 2.5, so not a heck of a lot. For the Six Nations, it was a lot more even spread. Top teams France with 10, similar to the All Blacks. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of stats where they kind of are the same in their competition, and like they're the top team for particular ways of playing the game. And for the Six Nations, Ireland was actually generating the least at 5.5. But Ireland, as the least in the Six Nations for clean breaks, was still better than the bottom two teams in the Rugby Championship for clean breaks. So, yeah, kind of less polarized in terms of the way the numbers came out. Offloads, you might think, yeah, the Rugby Championship, they chuck the ball around a heap more. There's heaps of forward passes. Well, yeah, I mean, again, but there's not a huge difference. 6.6 offloads a game per team to 5.5. It's France and New Zealand, again, who are the number one teams to chuck the offloads. It's Ireland and South Africa, again, who are the teams to not. So just as New Zealand and France seem to have a few parallels, South Africa and Ireland actually are able to have a few. The same with the kicks from hand. 24 per game in the Rugby Championship, 26 per game in the Six Nations. Guess who? Ireland number one with 30, South Africa number one with 31 in their respective competitions. It's actually Australia who does the fewest, and Italy in the Six Nations. But interestingly, Italy weren't always with the pill, whereas Australia tended to play a lot of a possession game, but just a wee bit more running than necessarily kicking. Now, penalty goals. You might think, yeah, this is where the Six Nations are going to smash it, man. Those guys love kicking the threes. Not in 2021. 2.6 is the average penalties kicked per game, per team in the Rugby Championship. 2.1 in the Six Nations. So the Rugby Championship has more three-pointers on average. South Africa is 4.5. So they really lead those numbers, whereas Argentina had really few point-scoring opportunities. 1.5. Ireland 3.6 and Italy 1. So that's kind of your top and bottom teams for the Six Nations. So interestingly, the Six Nations has the tries just a little bit on average, and the Rugby Championship have the penalties. So slightly against the stereotype. Anyway, mauls is pretty even, 6 a game to 5.6. It's England actually who loves the maul in the Six Nations, and it's South Africa in the Rugby Championship. Tackling percentage, the Six Nations is a wee bit higher, 87.8% to 85.8%. So again, it's not much in it, it's 2%, but it is slightly higher numbers in the old Six Nations. Penalties conceded, turnovers conceded, those numbers are all kind of pretty standard. Now, the ones that I think, aside from those ones which were largely kind of close, the ones that I think are the most interesting for mine, for the Rugby Championship, a stat which looks kind of pretty is the fact that there's an average meters per carry of 4.1. When the magic number is 4, if you're getting 4 meters a carry, you're generally getting good flow, good go forward ball. The Rugby Championship gets that with all the teams but Argentina getting kind of close. Like New Zealand 4.7, 5.2, the Aussies 4.6, the Pumas, the Box were at like 3.8, 3.9, and then it's only the Pumas who are like 3, so well below the kind of magic number of 4 meters per carry. Whereas the Six Nations is at 3.1. So that's one that, I mean, it's only one, like 4.1 to 3.1 doesn't seem like a huge difference, but in game terms, 1 meter per carry is actually a fair bit when you've got, 100 carries a game per team kind of thing. So that one's actually pretty significant. France got the magic 4. They were the highest team in the Six Nations, whereas Italy and Ireland were at 2.9. Ireland are kind of famous in recent times for kind of, recycling through those carries a lot, and that seemed to be the case. In Italy, maybe just speaks to the fact their attack is at times not able to really get over the advantage line quite as much. And interestingly, I don't know if this is a positive stat. Maybe it is for the Tri Nations, the Rugby Championship. Average of 110 tackles a game, whereas it's 140 for the Six Nations. So this is kind of what I mean. Like the Six Nations has more carries and it has more tackles. So the guys in the Rugby Championship are getting more with ball in hand. They're kind of able to, carry fewer times to get kind of more meters, if you know what I mean. So on the face value, that could be a more entertaining product. That's one opinion. But the one that I really like for the Six Nations is when you start looking at the points differences per game. Now, on face value, it's close. 16 points was the average difference per game in the Six Nations, 17 points for the Rugby Championship. But, to look a little bit deeper, if you look at the number of games that finished within a score, so 7 points or less, fewer, in the Rugby Championship, there's 12 games. 3 of them finish within a score at the death. So a quarter of the games. So the majority of the games, 75% of the games, 3/4 of them, you pretty much know who's going to win by the last couple of minutes, right? Whereas in the Six Nations, it's 8 out of the 15 games. So just over half of the games, as you head into that 78th, 79th minute, it's still all to play for. And kind of mind-explodingly, like massively, if you take Italy out of the equation, it's 8 of the 10 games. So a lot of those games, when I said 8 from 15, the Italy games are all beyond a score by the time it comes to the death. So 80% of the games without Italy, you don't know who's going to win right up until that last play, which I love. I mean, especially when you're neutral. Obviously, if your own team's playing, you want them just to smash the opposition. But there's nothing quite like, sitting on the edge of your seat, waiting to see who's going to win. You can honestly sometimes sit through a game, which ain't that pretty. But if it's all to play for in the last minute, then the excitement factor is tenfold. You can make it that without Argentina, it's 50% of the games in the Rugby Championship are within a score. It's just 3 out of the 6 games. But it doesn't quite seem the same. So 5.5 is the average point difference without Italy in the Six Nations. So pretty close games. Whereas it's like 12 without Argentina in the Rugby Championship. So what does that tell us? For the most part, they're pretty close, man. There's not a heck of a lot of difference. I forgot to mention the goal kicking. I forgot to write that down, but I do remember from the top of my head, the goal kicking percentage in the Six Nations is better. It was in the 80s. It was like 84, and the Rugby Championship was in the 70s. 71, maybe? Don't quote me on that one because I didn't write that down on my notes. I should have, though. I did run the stats for it. So goal kicking's a bit better as well. But I thought that was interesting, just to compare the two comps. As I said, there's not a heck of a lot of difference. There's certainly some strong arguments for supporting either competition. I like them both, man. What do I say? As I said, I don't know what the stereotypes of this competition are up north, but I know the ones that I hear about the Six Nations, and I don't find them personally to be particularly valid. But anyway, what do you guys reckon? And how do you reckon this stacks up for the November games? Obviously, we're going to get these teams playing these teams next month, so that's all happy days. But as I said, guys, just a bit of fun. You guys let me know your thoughts, and if you want British and Irish Lions gear, I know that's well past the fact, but it's getting discounted like no other. So I'll put a link in the description for the British and Irish Lions store. There's a heap of discounts on there. Have a world. There's like jackets that are going for crazy low prices. Like, I guess just because they're trying to get rid of it because it's the end of that tour. So especially if you guys are up north heading into winter, or if you guys are down south down here heading into summer, I want to pick up some British and Irish Lions gear. Stuff never goes old. So I'll put that link in the description. It's an affiliate one. Happy to work with those guys. But hopefully you guys can find some deals. All right, guys. Cheers. Take care. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.